Hello folks, we're going to be heading back to Taos soon, so hopefully we'll have some Earthship related content for you more than once a year. But in the meantime, I thought I'd show you how we're setting up the solar on the trailer that we're going to be taking down there. Trailers make good candidates for solar because they come pre-equipped with both a 12 volt system and a separate regular voltage system, 120, 240, that has its own plug. And if you get an inverter, you can just connect that in and turn on the inverter when you need it, so that you can have access to both. You just have to upgrade the battery bank. So that's what we're going to do. Take a look at all of the individual components here, and then I'll start actually putting them together. Here are the batteries that the trailer originally comes with. They're pretty dinky. They're about 20 amp hours each from what I remember. So we're going to be moving the wiring from these up inside to the interior compartment, where we've got these much larger batteries from Renogy. They're 200 amp hours each. We're going to run them in a parallel system. It's going to give us 400 amp hours. The next component we have in the solar system is the charge controller. This is what handles the input from the solar panels and converts it over so that the batteries can use it. Generally, it's recommended you go with the same brand for everything so you know it plays well together. But this ePeaver one comes highly recommended. So you can see from the heat fins here, it's supposed to be exceptionally good at heat dissipation. So that was important to us since we're going to be mounting everything in this little compartment here. We wanted to make sure that we had good heat control. It's rated for 40 amps. It's pretty much the max output we're going to get out of the panels that we have. Next up, we've got the solar panels themselves. We bought 4 of these flexible solar panels from Renogy. They're 160 watts each, and they're much lighter weight and about 6 inches smaller in each dimension than the standard panels, with a bit higher output. So they're good for mounting on a trailer like this. In order to connect the solar panels into anything, we need to have wiring. The size of the wire that you're going to use is going to be based on the amperage that you're going to be bringing in. We're doing 40 amp. Due to price limitations, we had to go with 8 gauge wire, which only gives us between 10 and 15 feet, depending on how much voltage loss we're willing to put up with. I'm trying to keep it to 10. We also have some of these adapters to make it easier to connect all 4 panels in. These are a little bit under the recommended gauge, but it's a really short distance. I tested them out. They don't seem to generate much heat output, so it shouldn't be a big deal. Connect to those adapters into the charge controller. We've taken our 8 gauge wire and crimped on these MD4 connectors at the end. And then on the other side, on the positive, we put in a fuse with a breaker switch. These inline fuses are a lot easier than using an actual breaker, although from what I understand you can use a standard house breaker if you really needed to. And then these will connect in on the charge controller. And then to go from the charge controller to the battery bank, we've taken another set of the 8 gauge. We crimped on some terminals at the end, and we put another fuse in the positive side. This is just a regular fuse, not a breaker fuse. And that you have to make sure that you keep within about 5 inches of the battery, so you want to keep it really close on the positive end. Ability to charge the battery bank and run the trailer's DC systems, but in order to run the higher voltage systems, what we need to do is get an inverter. This is a 2000 watt inverter, so a little bit over what we really need for this, but it should be able to run every individual appliance in here except for the AC, which you don't want to run on a solar battery bank because it will just kill your batteries, at least in this small of a setup. Inverter directly into the trailer itself, but it's a lot easier and less risky to just get an adapter for the 30 amp cord that comes as part of the trailer. Then you can just plug this directly to your inverter. The only thing you really have to be worried about there is you got to make sure the converter that charges your batteries is always turned off when your inverter is connected and turned on. Otherwise you cycle and just lose all of your energy to heat. Important consideration for the inverter is you need to have a much higher end fuse for the higher amperage that the inverter is going to use between it and the battery. This is a 300 amp fuse, which is what's rated for these. I believe these are 4, maybe 2 gauge connectors. Also comes with a remote switch, runs with a basic telephone wire that we are going to use connect up through this back panel into the bedroom area so that we can turn the inverter on and off without having to come out here and actually access the outer panel. This major component we've got is this battery monitor, also from Renogy. Comes with the monitor itself, a sampler shunt to connect into the battery, the wires to connect. This is for connecting to the shunt itself, and this is to run up to the monitor from the shunt. I'll show you how that all gets installed when we get there. Got an a monitor that goes with the charge controller that actually monitors your solar charging directly. It plugs into this little Ethernet port down here. Unfortunately, that takes forever to ship for the ePever model, so we don't have one yet. The battery monitor is going to give us most of the info we would get, but it's not going to give us the direct reading from the panels, just the actual charge input. Last thing before we actually start putting stuff together, I thought I'd go over all the tools that you're going to probably need to do a build. So obviously you're going to need some screwdrivers. You're going to want both a Phillips and a flathead, especially the charge controllers usually use a flathead to screw in the wires. You're going to want a hex set. Most of the fuses that I've found use a hex screw inside them to crimp down the wire. You're going to need to buy battery terminals. Make sure you check that they're actually going to fit on your post. I got ones that look like they probably should. Had to go back and get new ones. Wire connectors help you do splicing, make life easier there. Obviously electrical tape. I found having a knife was helpful for getting through the outer layer on the bigger wire. You're going to want 2 adjustable wrenches, because there's going to be some places where you're going to have to be on both the nut and the bolt with these things. I don't think you really need these, but if you're doing the ND4 connectors on the solar, these were recommended. I only did 2 connectors. I haven't found it worth it, but you might. You're going to need a crimper to crimp down your ends. The biggest thing here is make sure you get one sized for your wire. Most of them stop at 12 or 10 gauge. Make sure you get one that goes at least up to 6 if you're doing more than a single tiny ass panel. Tin snips I found were much better than my wire cutters for the thick copper. So I would use a pair of those, and then of course got some wire cutter pliers for stripping things down, pulling things out, that sort of thing. Almost forgot, also make sure that you get extra fuses for the fuses that you've got. The inline fuses didn't come with any, so I had to make sure I had these, and so it's good to have extras on the bigger fuse. I'm going to take here, so we're going to redo the batteries. I'm going to steal some of the cables off of these, use them on my battery bank, and then we're going to splice these in to some of that 8 gauge. Come up underneath through here, come out through this panel over this way, connect up here. We're going to push the batteries back in a little bit further once I've got everything wired, and then we'll start wiring in the charge controller. Longer than I expected, but get everything wired up. We spliced directly in out here using some twist caps, and then especially because these are external, you want to make sure you get really good coverage on your electrical tape, so there's no way that you're going to get any water in there. That comes up through that panel, which was a little more of a pain than I expected. I had to cut into this panel here and dig down. You can't really see very well on the camera. And then here's the full battery setup. So this battery in the back has basically nothing running on it. That's just there for the parallel. I am going to connect the inverter to it just because we've got so much stuff already on the positive over here. And here's the negative. I've got the shunt installed. It was a little too big to put in directly in the post, so I had to make a little connector here. We've got the power for the reader, positive and negative to go to the charge controller coming off in this direction. Here's the charge controller. I think this is where we're going to end up having to mount it because I can't get it over to this wall and still have the inverter connect to those larger cables that it needs. That's where it's going to go. If we come around, we've got the battery monitor hooked up. We need to calibrate it. I've got to wait until I can get the charge controller on there so it can tell me whether or not the battery's full. Right now we're drawing about 19 watts, 18, 15, 14 there. So that's pretty much just the fridge. The fan was on earlier, that bumped it up a little bit. But this gives us a decent readout at least of what's going on, and then once I calibrate, it should show us the hours and the percentages on here. The voltage is pretty high, 12.7, so it's probably mostly full. There's something to consider when you're working with the batteries is that you're always working with a live circuit, so be careful. I wasn't paying attention, and I let myself touch the negative terminal while I was screwing in the positive, and whew, that burned. Really, you should be wearing gloves. I'm just, crazy. The inverter wired in on the back. Pop up the lid of the battery box now that I put it on. You can kind of see it connected back there. Runs through a fuse to the inverter. We've got the charge controller connected. This over here, the green light flashing, means that we're getting good photovoltaic voltage. This light over here means our battery is already full. It's not too surprising, it's brand new batteries. We haven't really used them for anything. The charge controller is got this switch right here for the breaker that connects to the. It's a little touchy. Gotta be careful not to poke it. Apparently, that connects out to our solar panels. As I said, you can see the adapters here are a little short, and with the wiring for a parallel series, which we need because we got to stay at 12 volts. If you do your panels in series, you increase your voltages. It's a little bit of wonky, so we're gonna, once we're down there, figure out how to put a frame together or get those mounted up on the trailer itself, maybe in the front, to keep from spending a whole bunch on more expensive larger gauge wire. We got to keep it fairly short anyway. So now it says that our battery is full. We're gonna go ahead and calibrate the battery monitor, and we should basically be done. I'll test out the inverter, and that'll be it. We ran into a slight complication here. The plug that goes to the RV is just a little bit too bulky to actually fit right in on the inverter. So we're just going to run an extension cord for now. I'll figure out a better workaround in the long run. Go ahead, click the inverter on. It's on. So far nothing's exploded. It's a good sign. I'm going to come around inside the RV. Open up the panel here. We're going to turn on everything except for the converter. So main, we can leave the AC off actually. Generator, converter, microwave, fridge. Jeez. There we go. Now I'm going to go run the microwave for a little while and make sure that happens. We'll check the battery afterwards. We ran the microwave for 3 minutes. It's a 900 watt microwave. I would have expected it to have at least some impact, but it doesn't look like it dented the battery at all. It might just because we're at a pretty good charge right now. We've got great sun on the panels. Might also be because I don't have the inverter on the shunt. I did not have big enough gauge wire on the connector to be able to handle the amperage load that the inverter might draw. So we might not be getting completely accurate readings, but it definitely doesn't look like it impacted the panels. So I think we're good. At the very least, we were able to operate. And that is it. That is a solar setup. All right, folks. So here it is in action. We knocked together a wooden frame for it. Measurements didn't work out quite the way I wanted for the wiring, so that's why it looks a little weird here. We had to cobble it on some extra stuff to make it actually able to reach all the adapters. And then I had to extend our cord a couple feet to be able to actually reach. That puts us at a couple more percent voltage loss. I'm hoping we're still below regular amount when we hit full capacity. I had to redo the shunt and move it over because it wasn't reading from the inverter consumption, which I kind of suspect was going to happen, but I didn't realize that the way that it was tracking the amp hours was not going to read accurately at all. We got lucky and had a voltage drop warning instead. We're not quite at peak, but we're getting 350 watts or so, 26 amps. We should get up to the high 30s in amps, hopefully, when we hit peak of the day. And it'll also probably help once we get this off the ground a little bit so that it's at an angle. Tends to improve the amount of generation you get.
And that's really it. The system's been operating for about 2 weeks now. Seems to be going good.